The island nation of Sri Lanka has been at the center of the South Asian news space for its continuously deteriorating economic crisis in the past few weeks. There have been swelling protests all across the country with prominent Sri Lankan voices, including former Prime Minister and former Chief Justice, joining the chorus demanding government's accountability in the crisis. Meanwhile, the government, which is in early stages of its talks with the IMF to seek a bailout, hasn't been able to hit any breakthrough.
Protests in Sri Lanka took an unprecedented turn after a demonstrator was killed in a police shooting past week. The shooting was the first by Sri Lankan security forces during weeks of protests. The government, which has already found itself cornered on massive shortages of fuel and food owing to Forex reserve depletion, seems to have invited another major trouble, with people now even blocking roads and other activities to express their anger, propping another major law and order challenge. Several marches were carried out with floats reading "Bring down the cost of living," "Bow down to the people's verdict," and "Gotta go home." They have been essentially demanding President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to resign. And now the dissenting voices are not just confined to common people and opposition leaders, but prominent political and judicial voices too have come out in open, urging the government to take responsibility for the crisis the country has plunged into. Former Chief Justice of Sri Lanka, Sarath N. Silva, called the island country's government a total failure while addressing Sri Lanka's economic crisis.
There's a total failure of the government mechanism. The ministers have resigned. President is calling people to take up office of ministerial positions. They take up, next day resign. So there is no confidence, there is no purpose. In any event, under the constitution, if a motion of no confidence is passed, once again the thing turns over to the president. President shall appoint another person as prime minister and shall appoint a cabinet of ministers. So you pass a note of no confidence, back again it goes to the same person. This is the whole problem. So it is not going to serve any purpose.
Sri Lanka's total external debt has reached around $50 billion, and it is not in a position to pay even for essential imports, including food items. Earlier, the government had said that it required between $3 billion to $4 billion this year to pull itself out of an unprecedented economic crisis. However, experts and observers feel it will take much more than that. Former Prime Minister is of the opinion that despite significant support from neighboring India, which has supported the country with a $1.5 billion line of credit and has been shipping essentials, the country is unable to fend for itself in the coming future.
India has provided $1.5 billion credit for fuel and for food. The fuel credit line will be over most probably in the first week of May. So there will be another crisis. The government has requested the Indian government to give an extension of the fuel line of credit. But I think there are also issues, because since the government of Sri Lanka has declared itself to be bankrupt, the question of how institutions deal, how creditors deal with bankrupt countries and institutions arise.
Meanwhile, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who had proposed for a unity government in order to save the country from the crisis, has reappointed his cabinet following opposition's and allies' rebuff towards his idea. And while he has dropped a few Rajapaksas from his cabinet, Gotabaya hasn't been able to come up with any major ideas to go forward with. However, he affirmed that he was ready to go to any length to prevent further deterioration.
විවස්ථාවේ සිදුවිය යුතු වෙනස්කම් ගැන මෑත කාලේ විවිධ දේශපාලන පක්ෂ විසින් ප්‍රකාශ කරන ලද අදහස් පාර්ලිමේන්තුව තුළ සාකච්ඡා කළ අවශ්‍ය වෙනස්කම් සම්මත කර ගැනීමට අවකාශය තිබෙනවා. ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් අවශ්‍ය පූර්ණ සහාය ඕනෑම අවස්ථාවක පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ලබා දීමට මම සූදානම්.
Meanwhile, Sri Lanka is looking at making a decent case before the IMF to help preserve the economy. The government was hopeful of receiving some emergency funds within a week of talks that started on 18th this month. However, it doesn't seem to have convinced the IMF enough as of now. The International Monetary Fund said this week that it has asked cash-strapped Sri Lanka to restructure its huge foreign debt before a bailout program could be finalized as anti-government protests escalated across the island. Sri Lanka opened talks with the IMF in Washington this week after announcing its first ever default on external borrowings. Earlier this year, the IMF warned Sri Lanka's approximately $51 billion foreign debt was unsustainable. The IMF said that Colombo's existing debt also means the country cannot apply for emergency financing. This comes as a major blow to Colombo, as they are seemingly running out of both ITRs and even limited money they are left with. Overall, it appears that long blackouts, queues for gas and fuel, and skyrocketing prices are nowhere close to disappearing from everyday discourse, at least as of now.